Tēnā rā tātou, ko Billy Van Uitregt ahau. My name is Billy Van Uitregt. I'm from Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. It's my great pleasure to chair this first panel. You might see that the Indigenous panel is opening the conference. Later today we have two shorter sessions of Indigenous presentations, and then to close our day between 5 and 6, we've got a film being shown to give us a bit of a reality check of the experiences of Indigenous communities from Alaska in this instance. So today is very much a place where the Indigenous participants in this conference can kind of get together and be dialogical. So it doesn't necessarily fit the standard format of one talk after the other. We're trying to be much more dialogical in our conversation today. So our opening plenary is 4 Indigenous researchers and leaders from around the world, leading research in icy places. Kei te pai. It's my great pleasure to open this plenary and to chair the conversation, but I wanted to just set a little bit of a framing before I pass over to Waikato. So in Aotearoa, we often talk about Indigenous knowledges and science by invoking these metaphors of weaving. But I think everybody in the room will know that this weaving isn't always a straightforward process. Kei te pai. We've got the braided rivers concept, which is a Māori concept from the South Island of Aotearoa. We've got braiding sweetgrass. We've heard that phrase a lot. And this conceptualization probably doesn't speak to a lot of the nuance of that pops up in these real-life engagements of these knowledge traditions. In Aotearoa, a more recent metaphor has been forthcoming, talking about waka taurua, where you've got a Western science waka, a canoe, and an Indigenous knowledges canoe, or mātauranga Māori canoe in this instance, and they maintain their independence from each other, but find ways to negotiate between each other. So it's sort of a step on from this idea of weaving. From the Arctic, some people might refer to this as ontological self-determination, to avoid those risks of Indigenous knowledges being brought into the Western scientific framework. And I hope everybody in the room has some practical experience of that, where it doesn't always work so smoothly. Kei te pai. So I wanted to set that frame for all of our conversations in our plenary today, but also for our shorter talks later and our presentation or a screening of a film from an Alaskan community later this afternoon. But without further ado, I'll open up to Sandy Morrison. You guys have the app, I hope, and can load up questions there. We'll be able to see them. Sandy is the Dean, Faculty of Māori and Indigenous Studies at the University of Waikato. She has a long list of accolades that I won't go through right now. I'll let her speak to all of that. But important to know that she is from Ngāti Whakaue, Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Rarawa, Ngāti Tama, ki te tau ihu o te waka a Māui. So without further ado, Sandy, would you like to come up and take the stage, and we'll bring up your presentation. Tēnā.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi kia tātou. Ngā mihi hoki ki te atiawa e whakatau I a mātou, aha ko wai koe, no hea koe, no reira rere tonu ngā mihi kia rātou. Tēnā koutou. Thanks, Billy, for the introduction. And actually, I made a mistake with my abstract. It was an old one that was attached. That's what you do, right, in a flurry. And people want this, and that, and you just grab anything. So I have not been Dean for a year, which has allowed me to focus on my research, which has been really, really awesome. And I speak here in my capacity as belonging to the Kāhui Māori for the Antarctic Science Platform, and also on the steering group of the Antarctic Science Platform as well. And can I just check that you're looking at me for time? Because I don't have a watch, so if I could have 5 minutes, that would be great. Thank you. I want to set the scene as well, like Billy has done, and just remind you of which region, given all the flights that you've had. This is our region. I was really pleased to hear Minister Reti say that the Antarctica and the Southern Oceans is not remote, it is close. And I guess I also want us to note that in this Indigenous, in the presentation of Indigenous perspectives, that we have a different way of looking at the world, that in our Indigenous perspectives we have so many stories that give us the validity of how we think and what drives us. And this area is all full of these stories. And one thing that I would like you to note is that we speak of the oceans that connect us. So the ocean's not separating us, but connecting us. And in line with this, I want to introduce a poem from a Samoan elder, a Samoan high-ranking chief. And I think that it's a lovely way in which to contextualise everything that you'll hear this morning. I know you can read, but because I like reading, I just thought that I would read it aloud. I am not an individual. I'm an integral part of the cosmos. I share a divinity with my ancestors, the land, the seas, and the skies. I'm not an individual because I share a tofi with my family, my village, and my nation. I belong to my family, and my family belongs to me. I belong to my village, and my village belongs to me. I belong to my nation, and my nation belongs to me. This is the essence of my sense of belonging. And you will pick some of the key characteristics and tenets of this poem, one of collectivity, one of reciprocity, and one of obligation. So it doesn't really matter, I think, when we think about the reason for which we are working and doing our science. It's not for our own individualistic benefit. It's not for the number of citations that we get, but in the end, it's for the greater benefit, the greater kaupapa. And for us as Indigenous peoples, and I think that I can say this applies to many others, it's for the well-being of our families and our village. And all of that intergenerational and that focus on intergenerational health is really important. So I offer this in which to frame the speeches to come. Billy, thank you for introducing those concepts as well. I think that they're really important models for us to know and follow. I'm not going to talk about concepts this morning. I want to introduce to you what we, in our New Zealand policy framework, have been doing to ensure the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge in science investment and in science research. And despite the disempowering of many of our Māori policies that we have, this Vision Mātauranga policy framework still stands. Well, today anyway. And I'm sure that it's still, I have some belief that it will still exist this year. I say this like this, but it's also been a very important policy framework for those coming from other diverse knowledge systems to engage with Māori and with Māori knowledge in terms of their research, because it is an important part as to whether you get funded or not. Many of you would know that we are a large proportion of the population here, so you can't avoid us. We're too big, and we protest really loudly and wildly. And we also have Te Tiriti o Waitangi that anchors us. So the culmination of those has led to several policy gains over many years, and this is one. So this is the policy framework. So it's got this fabulous purpose, right? Unlocking the potential and realising the potential of Māori knowledge. And why? Because we're all set to benefit. In the end, isn't that what we want? For that breadth and depth of human knowledge to inform all of our work, no matter where we are. And running alongside that, of course, is building the capacity and then supporting our relationship with our government. These are the themes which are offered under the Vision Mātauranga policy, and they still remain these themes as well. But where the road meets whatever, where the challenge is an easier way of saying is, so what? What do I do now? With this policy framework, it's great to have a policy, but what happens on the ground? And this is where that there needs to be a lot of work done. When Billy talked about the waka, is it haurua or taurua? Yep. And what happens in the in-between and how we negotiate space for working together. And so for many, you notice I've got in this some in science communities and some in Māori communities, because I don't want to take an absolute approach, because there's a lot of diversity in all of our communities, and I'd like to think that we're all moving in between and accepting everybody else's knowledge systems. So for some it is, oh no, this policy again that I don't even know what it means. And why? Why should I engage with this? Goodness, where do I start and who do I talk to? And I'm running out of time. I really need this application to be in now. And from a Māori perspective, ensuring that we are actually the right people to ask. Because we all come from our own tribal communities. Place is really important to us. And when you're in a city, you wouldn't necessarily ask yourself, have I got the right people? Who holds the mana here and who would be interested in our work? Because sometimes it feels like we're just waiting around for people to say, can you be part of my research? But we're not. We're really, really busy anyway, and many of us prefer to do Māori-led projects, because that's that relationship in which we trust rather than grow. And who is going to benefit from this research? That is a critical component of the way that we do our research. And if we're going to be working with scientists from other knowledge systems, in that in-between space, what do they know about us? So that we always don't have to second guess and explain ourselves. And who makes these decisions? And for us, it's, so how can we access that money and that funding to benefit our communities? So I guess we appear in many spaces. We appear obviously in Māori-led research, Māori-centred research, but many of us also work through these partnership approaches that Billy talked about, with this emphasis on relationships. So working in this Vision Mātauranga space requires our partners, the people that we'll be working with, to start building relationships with us way before that application is due, so that we can work on that relationship, that the people we're working with understand our aspirations and then become committed to those aspirations as well. Behaving like a partner rather than like a funder, and thinking that this work is doing us a favour, but seeing it as a complementary system where we all benefit and gain. Identifying other opportunities as well will happen when there's early engagement, and we are very locally based as well. So while we're happy to get involved nationally and internationally, our experience is located and rooted in our communities, and that's the perspective that we come from. And so in some of these funding arrangements, they don't necessarily meet what we would regard as Māori approaches. So we always have a lot of work to do to say that, yes, well, once we have this funding, our reporting mechanisms also have to alter so that our realities come through. So it's a really important part of compliance, and these all need to be negotiated with the partner with whom we're working. And this slide on your right is that it's really important to embed te tiriti across all of the research that we do. And as Billy said, we came through a period of integrating and weaving things together, but many Māori have now shifted, and it's important that each knowledge system holds its own mana, and then we work out together what those outcomes will be, which is a bit of a challenge in some instances. So this is the way that we have been working after we figure out who are the partners. In the Antarctic science space, which is my main experience, rather than our icy areas here in Aotearoa, it's a little bit more difficult because we don't, as Indigenous people, have that long history of habitation, because that's just the way that it is. So how then, our challenge as Māori then, is to find our sense of place and recreating place in spaces that we haven't been. And I'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon rather than now. And that is a challenge when one is creating research programs in spaces you haven't been, and then that is still set to benefit, your aim is still set to benefit the rest of Aotearoa. However, we do have one of our southernmost tribes, collectively known as Ngāi Tahu, but again, with many hapu responsible for their specific localities, like in the glaciers, there are specific hapu there, and their work over hundreds of years must be respected, and their treaty settlement actually granted them mana moana, the concept that we call mana moana, as far south as the Auckland Islands. So no matter what we do in the Antarctic space, having Ngāi Tahu on board and supportive is a pretty big gain. And for many of us in this space, it's an emerging area of research, and it's about how do we think about our relationships with ice. We are very big on land. Can we just translate our relationships with land or with whenua over to the ice? And these are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves. Within the Antarctic space, our Kāhui Māori, or our Māori Council, have been working very constructively with our colleagues within the Antarctic science space, and we've all been learning from each other. So yesterday, I think that was Sunday, we had a workshop to help build scientists' capacity of understanding our Māori ways of doing things. And just in addition, because we were able to go to the Antarctica and spend 2 weeks down there as well over November and have the privilege of seeing all of the amazing scientists doing their work in place. And I think what really struck me there, that they embody and become the face of guardians on behalf of us all. We have the word kaitiakitanga, and that's what we saw in practice, but I can't talk about that here because my time is nearly up. So just some resources where we have delved quite deeply into what Māori knowledge looks like in science spaces, no matter what the space. This is one of the documents there with the reference, with this very important comment that it is important Māori also enjoy the outputs of research activity and that our knowledge systems are acknowledged. And the last reference that I thought that many of you would be interested in is this one as well. Not quite sure how this one is standing up in our current policy, but it's a very, very solid, robust document as well. And so with that, Billy, I'll finish off and leave space for my colleagues, who we welcome with all of our heart. Ngā mihi. Thank you for your attention. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Kia ora.
Next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Liza Mack. Dr. Mack is Inuvik, born and raised in King Cove, Alaska. She has a PhD in Indigenous Studies from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. Lots of other roles and hats are worn by Dr. Mack, but I'll just leave off with this one. She serves as the head of delegation to the Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council, and I believe she'll be speaking very much from that perspective today, the work that she leads amongst her own communities and at that high level. Kia ora, Liza.
Anga. Kila mekuna, everybody. Aluk tatua sakta cooking. Good morning, I am Dr. Liza Mack. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to the Manafoya, whose lands we are on, and our friends and colleagues here in Aotearoa for having us. They've already shown us so much hospitality and well-being in getting us here safely, so I'm really appreciative to be here. Thank you to the organizers for asking me to participate in this plenary session. I am honored to be part of this distinguished panel and to share my experience and illustrate the complexities and the successes of the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge in both intentional and meaningful ways. So again, Kila Mikumna, good morning. I am Liza Mack, I am Unanga, and I was born and raised in Agdao, or King Cove. My families are both from Taktamo and Sanak, that is Bilkoski and Sanak Island, and my grandfather on my dad's side was born in Germany in 1883. Yes, that is 1883. So growing up in the Aleutians has shaped who I am as a person, who I am as a scholar, who I am as a mother, an aunt, and an advocate for our people, and for the rest of the Indigenous people who live off of the resources that we have. In advocating for our resources, when we think about Indigenous knowledge and co-production, we need to think about how we, as Indigenous people, fight for a seat at the table, when really this is our table. This is our place to be, and this is where we are going to be the ones to invite you. So this is a picture of my hometown, King Cove, and you would probably think that it doesn't look very Arctic. So it is actually subarctic, but we are the gateway to a lot of the things that happen in the Bering Sea. And much like Sandy mentioned, we are connected by our oceans. We are connected by these systems that you have throughout the world. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of the background that Billy mentioned, I do serve as the head of delegation to the Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is a high intergovernmental forum that has all of the nation states and 6 permanent participant groups. SDWG is focused on kind of the human element of the research that goes into different things. And the thing that's unique about the Arctic Council is that it is a consensus-based organization, meaning that you need to be able to bring forward projects and bring forward initiatives that can be supported across the circumpolar north. And we do see that with a lot of the things that we've been involved in. Prior to my current position at APICTA, which is the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Development Community Development Association, I worked at the Denali Commission. What these 2 positions have taught me, along with being involved with the Arctic Council, is that across the circumpolar north, we do see a lot of the similar issues. We see issues with solid waste, suicide, climate change, and these things are all being exacerbated and they're being experienced firsthand by our Indigenous people and by our communities across the north. So that's just kind of a little bit of the background that we have. We are also experiencing a lot of changes in the permafrost and in the and how quickly the temperature is changing, and that is affecting our communities. It's affecting our communities and the infrastructure that we build and the funding that we need in order to stay in our own places. First and foremost, I am Unach. This is my son, and we are actually on the beach in Atka, which is far out west. It's actually in the same time zone as Hawaii. Alaska has 3 time zones, it is so big. But we were harvesting padarkis and umgu, that is black katy chiton and Pacific giant octopus. And those are things that we eat all the time. But one of the things that drove my research was actually being able to have space to do these things and to continue our cultural practices. So it brought me to the questions in my dissertation about how we have access to our resources and what we need to be able to do to continue to have access to our resources. These maps illustrate several different ways that space is negotiated in Alaska. Space is negotiated everywhere. I take a political ecology approach to a lot of these things, being able to understand that being an advocate for our resources and being an advocate for who we are is important. We have to be able to understand all these different social structures, these governmental structures, and how they're layered and how they are present in our everyday life. So one of the quotes that I hold dear is a quote that I heard from Graham Smith, who is a Maori scholar. Him and Linda Smith have definitely influenced my research and the things that I like to do and say. But he said, education gives us the opportunity to be good leaders. And I feel like that is something that is also applicable in this room. It's applicable to those of us who are scientists, who are doing things that are seemingly outside of what is happening in Indigenous communities, but it's really not. Indigenous people have been there for millennia, and they will continue to be there. And so when we think about our research questions and we think about our planning, just as Sandy has just mentioned, those things need to be rooted in communication with our people who are on the land. This is a picture of my dad, and he is on a, would be a tender. We are from a fishing community. And what's interesting about this picture to me is that as my dad is sitting there on the side of the tender, which would have gotten the fish that is taken to the cannery, is that there's eucalyptus up there on the ladder, dry fish. In our communities, commercial fishing and subsistence fishing go hand in hand. They are one and the same. They are not separate. Our commercial fishermen bring in our catches, and we also use that for processing, and we also use those for what sustains us over the winter. This is one of the things that, when you think about the maps that I just showed you, are part of a negotiated space and a part of a negotiated agreement. Not everything is very cut and dry. You do have to have the latitude to be able to participate in conversations in a way that allows for these spaces to be used in multiple ways. These are my uncles, some of my very favorite elders. But one of the things that we talked about, I had actually ran into them. We were out the road, and my cousins had just brought in some fish, and they were out at one of the creeks where all the bears are, so that they could clean the fish out there so that the bears could actually get all the scraps would be not wasted. But my uncle in the hat back there, he's actually my youngest uncle on my dad's side, the youngest of 19, and he just turned 77 like a week ago. But one of the things that we had talked about as we were driving out there, and we talked about the tides, and we talked about how you can tell when there's fish, how you can tell when there's different things happening. And he explained to me that you have to see the rips in the water. You have to understand what the tide is doing and all these different things. And so it kind of helped me to think about the fact that in order to be part of our own environments, we have to be very knowledgeable about multiple things. These guys aren't just fishermen, or they aren't just culture bearers. They are scientists. They have to understand oceanography, salinity, bathymetry. They have to understand all of these technical things and translate them from what they know so that we can be better explained to those of us who are coming in from outside. Tuku mach maktahim idach taku. Chief knows what he has to do. In Unangam Tanu, there actually isn't a word for science. So we have to come back to, you have to be able to know the things. You have to be able to have experiences and those elders and those people that help to put you in the place, but also to be able to connect. And to connect in a way that helps to illustrate what is important. So Indigenous knowledge is this body of observations and of oral and written knowledge. It's our innovations and our practices and our beliefs. And it is both with tribal and Indigenous people, and it's through the interaction of experience with the environment. This is actually the IK statement that used to be a part of the past administration's, one of their initiatives in the United States. And I think that it does encompass a lot. Of course, that's with a change in administration, that's not as acceptable. But in our communities, some of the things that we've been doing, and we've been doing for 30 years, is continuing our culture and doing that through some of these different spaces. These are pictures of culture camp down in Atka when I had my niece down there. I've been fortunate to be able to have space to do things like work with our cultural elders, work with language, work with our communities, and be able to share that with the next generations of Unangak people. Sally Swetsoff is actually one of the board of directors for the Aleutian International Association. I'm also one of them. And she and her husband were instrumental in bringing back Unangak dance. And this is her, and she teaches every year on how to make suks. And now we have like 6 or 7 dance troupes in the Aleut region, which is a huge accomplishment. And we do that through these places and spaces. This here is another picture of the Sandpoint Culture Camp. And if you can see the picture in the middle, that's not actually 2 pictures, that's a picture of the kids upstairs learning dance, and then downstairs they're doing all these cultural crafts and stuff. And so it's been very, it's an amazing thing to be a part of, I guess, for myself. But that brings me back to the advocacy and why it's important to be involved in the conversations, why it's important that Indigenous people are part of the planning process. This here is David Osterbach, and it is my dad, Barney Mack. But one of the things that I talked about in my dissertation research and in my scholarship is really just the amount of effort that Indigenous people are that is put upon them to be involved in these things. So I had asked everybody who is sitting on a tribal council or a corporation in our region to answer a few questions. I had maybe 20-some responses, and I asked them, how many years have you participated in different parts of advocacy? And out of the 21 respondents, they had participated in over 923 years of service. That's 40 years of service on the Board of Fish, 40 years of service on their city councils, 40 years of service on their tribal councils, 30 here, 20 there. And it adds up really fast. But what that also signifies is the fact that when we as researchers and scientists go into communities, we need to be prepared. We need to do exactly what Sandy said. What do we know about the Maori culture before we are approaching people to answer our questions? We need to be sure that we are educating ourselves so that we can still actually hold a conversation and be able to assist with things that might be important, things like subsistence, things like birds. These are things like the projects that people may not know are important to our people. This is just an example of one of the projects that I was involved in. As I mentioned, my family was from Sanak Island. And so participating in a project where we were looking at different specimens of the bones to understand how their foraging changed over time. And so what this does is it actually not just shows you a food web, but it shows you where birds were fishing. So when we think about glaciers melting and and water changing and glaciers not being there, we also have to think about Indigenous people were there the first time the glaciers melted. We did travel then. But also, what is that going to do to the water columns right now? What are our scientists going to be able to teach us? And so bringing what we already have with us to those next conversations is important. And also still understanding that things aren't always what they seem. You could have both. Things are work in conjunction, and they work together a lot of times. So with that, I guess just understanding that there are multiple layers of governance, there are multiple ways to research things and to approach things. And so I hope that just what I've mentioned here and in this last little bit has just given you an idea that research is often rooted and driven by community and by family. And also, we are important to not only what the research plan is, but what the research questions are, and also making sure that that connection and that rapport that you build with a community is something that is sustained over time. Indigenous communities have often had a lot of helicopter research come in and out, and so making sure that we are good stewards of our science and of our community is very, very important. So, Kakasako? Go Hawks.
Tēnā koe, Liza. That last remark was go Hawks, and apparently there's a big game on today. So a few people might be disappearing shortly after this to watch Super Bowl. I might disappear to watch the halftime show. Okay. Next up, maybe I'll just say thank you, Liza, for that kōrero. It's really heartening when we hear narratives from very diverse parts of the world. The distinctions are very clear, but also those threads of similarity reveal themselves very quickly. So I feel like the conversations today, the dialogue is going to be a very rich one. Next up to contribute to that dialogue, we have Douglas Esagok. Doug is a hunter, trapper and reindeer herder living in the Inuvik settlement region of Canada's Western Arctic. He has been observing changes in the landscape and waterways of the Mackenzie Delta area and assisting scientists to conduct research since 1998. He has enabled collection of some of the longest time series relating to changing permafrost conditions that are available anywhere. Tēnā koe, Doug. It's really great to have you here, everyone. Looking forward to your kōrero. Tēnā.
Thank you, Billy. Well, I thank everybody for inviting me to this conference. It sure has been a long way for me to come here, as I'm from the Arctic region of the Mackenzie Delta, the Western Arctic part of Canada. Last week, this time, I was out with the reindeer herd, traveling with them over the land at about 30 below. So coming here is quite the shock in temperature. I'm hot. The reason I'm here is to talk to you about how I and my people, we as Inuvik people of the Western Arctic coast, use both Western science and our own observations to understand and manage the changing environment that we experience firsthand. We have always hunted caribou as far back as our stories go, but in the late 1920s, a herd of reindeer was driven from Alaska to the Mackenzie Delta because the caribou were declining. And the reason they did that was to provide a stable supply of meat for our people. And since then, the herd has gone up and down in numbers, and ownership has passed through many hands over the years. But now it's owned and managed by us. It's owned and managed by us, and mostly to provide a secure source of country meat. And this is especially important for the elders in our 6 communities. We often receive advice from government wildlife biologists, and in fact, we know the herd now that we have over 5,700 head of animals because of a drone survey that we just had done like within the last 2 weeks. Me and the other herders live out with the deer on our 2-week shifts. We travel over the land with them. The annual migration that we take them close to the coast in the summer for fawning and back inland in the winter is about 70 nautical miles each way. But the deer travel a lot more than that because they travel around and mill around in areas that we try to keep them. It means that we herders, we really get to see what is going on in the landscape and how the seasons are changing. So I'll play this little video of the reindeer. During this day it was minus 40, and we're moving the herd into fresh pastures, and you get to see this, the amount of steam that comes off them from their breath. And here we have about 5,000 reindeer. So this is a map of my land, and in the bottom corner you can see a red box in which shows you where we live in Canada. I guess, yep, that little corner there. On the edge of the Beaufort Sea, on the main map you can see the location of my community at Inuvik and the new road that joins up with another community, Tuktoyaktuk, to the north. The road was opened in 2017. The reindeer typically like to stay north of the road, and they spend their winter in the Caribou Hills, which Franklin called the Reindeer Hills then we take them to Richards Island for the summer for the fawning period. This is also the area in which the most well-known research on permafrost was conducted by Dr. Ross Mackay. He worked in the area from 1952 until 2011, and several of my family members knew him and worked alongside of him. He had 2 special field sites, one at Gary Island and the other at a place called Esagok, both of which are marked on the map. It's about 70 nautical miles from Inuvik to Esagok. The delta is a big flat plain, and the hills to the east are rolling. It's easy ground to travel over in the winter. Our area has climate records that go back over a century. So although Inuvik was built in 1957, we can see how the climate changed over a longer period. This graph shows each year's mean annual temperature and then a running average of 10 years as the black line. You can see that since about 1970, the climate has been warming up steadily, and there's been an increase in the annual temperature of 4 degrees in the last 50 years. In fact, the first year that I worked with Ross and his young colleague Chris Byrne back in 1998, which then we all thought was an extreme year, but you can see that is pretty usual now. That year, Ross and Chris and I went to make measurements at Esagok, and a lake that Ross drained in 1978 to study the growth of permafrost. Esagok is at the coast, and there is a cabin there, which means we could stay there in the winter. There are many measurements going on there. We have measured ground temperatures and thawing of the ground. We have measured the movement of the ground and have done lots of drilling to collect samples of ground ice. Ross built a cabin on Gary Island and in 1962, and the measurements have been taken there every year since then. The 3 of us are standing outside the cabin in this picture, which was taken in the last century. That's why it's in black and white. At Gary and Esagok, we've been making measurements of ground temperature for 30 years. The data you can see on this slide are annual measurements made there and at Paimiut to the east and Herschel Island to the west of the delta. From Paulatuck to Herschel is about 500 miles along the western Arctic coast. Me and Chris drilled the holes for these thermistor cables and then went back again and again to monitor what is going on. So it's really difficult to stop a slump from developing once it has started in our area, and there's much buried glacier ice left over from the last ice age. Many of the slumps and the thick masses of dirty ice, we are very concerned about them because sediment from the slumps can block creeks and rivers and affect fish habitat, and it also could be added to lakes. This picture is close to the limit of the ice sheet, which you can see by the rubble on the hillside. Below the limit, the ground is covered by green vegetation growing and the glacial deposits. And there we find massive ice. You can see there's a slump developed in it. At the bottom of the picture is Canoe Lake, which used to be clean but now is brown and full of sediment. We have observed the dirty water for nearly 15 years, but now we're getting concerned about other chemicals that are being released from thawing permafrost terrain, especially mercury, which is finding its way into our food. The new high silt loads in our streams are most evident on the west side of the delta. You can see the slump that goes right into the water there. In this picture, me and Freddie Rogers, an elder from our community, are looking out over the Mackenzie Delta from the Caribou Hills on the east side. We are atop a steep hill slope that is the eastern boundary of the delta. One of the aspects of climate change that we have noticed is that the freeze up of the delta has taken longer, and in the fall we have way more storms than before, and these happen in September and October. But now instead of snowstorms, there's intense rainfall. In September, most of the scientists have gone back home and concluded their research for the year, and a lot of the landslides that we're seeing are coming after the researchers have left. So it's very important for people like me that use the land a lot to document these things and work with researchers to or mainly just let them know what's going on, and then they come and they study them. So back in late September of 2017, there was a night of intense rain, and many landslides took off down the slope along these Caribou Hills. In fact, there were 87 landslides like this, these ones along 11-kilometer stretch of the hills. I had seen landslides like this before in 2009 when 25 occurred after a storm lasting 2 full days, because immediately after the weather got good, I went out moose hunting. And then when I was on my way out, I noticed a big landslides on the edge of the river. Okay, and on the left-hand side, there's a picture of part of the hills taken by Ross Mackay in 1954. You cannot see any evidence of landslides on it. In fact, there's one on aerial photos taken in 1935 and the other one before 1995. But then nothing until the 2 sets I've told you about in 2009 and 2017, and both were set off by autumn rainstorms. The third feature I'd like to show you is the lowlands of the outer delta. In summer, it is usually possible to go by boat into most of the delta. The area is flat and very close to sea level. Now, with so much open water in our Beaufort Sea due to the shrinking of the sea ice, we experience storm surges during such storms that might flood much of the outer delta. Flooded with salt water, and there's a particularly big surge in September 1999, just like last year in 2000, when I went to the outer delta to look for geese. There weren't any because the area that they used to stage was totally salt-killed. All the vegetation, the berries, everything was dead. It was very hard to see anything like that, especially when we rely so much on our food that we catch ourselves. Okay, I mentioned that the ducks and the geese weren't there and everything was black. So we called that area the dead zone after I documented it and I shared my information with researchers. And you could see in this picture, the river in the background is Reindeer Channel. It was given its name by the way they brought the reindeer into our region. They ran them down that big river there across the Beaufort coast. There were 2 or 3 patches like this in the outer delta, and we asked Steve Coquel, another researcher, to look at it, and he got some of his friends to study and study what had gone on, the reason for it. And their explanation is showed on this slide here. The delta is normally flooded by fresh water, like in the springtime, but in surge during storms, the incoming ocean water, already diluted by the Mackenzie's outflow, mixes with the delta water, but when the ground freezes a week or so later, the salt in the water is concentrated ahead of the freezing fronts, and the salty water made the soil toxic to plants. It's a good example of us telling the scientists about something that is of interest to both them and the local people. And here's a short video of me and a couple of my partners pushing reindeer, just for context of part of the herd. This is only about 1/4 of the herd. This is during roundup in the fall after freeze up, when it's safe for us to travel by snowmobile. You see my other partner there, he's on his snowmobile, and we just move the deer slowly like that, and they're really tame. Because they're used to us pushing them around. So with that, thank you, and thank you all for listening. And there's a picture of one of the first sunrises after the winter darkness, and me with a big fish I just caught. Thank you.
That's great. The threads continue to reveal themselves. If we can bring up our final plenary speech for today. It's my great pleasure to introduce Angut Kahak Estelle Thomson to the stage. Estelle is the president of the native village of Paimiut Traditional Council. She wears lots of hats. I'll let her speak to those. But tēnā koe waia. Great to have you in your kōrero gracing the stage today. Kia ora.
Angut rarauga, napara miunga. I'll make my traditional introduction short, just for time. But I am Angut Kahak. I am the one who is supposed to be a man, or more accurately in my language, the one who will provide. Yupik does not have gender, so my name can go to either male or females. The placeholder in the program that states that I'm talking about bird migration is partially true. What I'm really going to talk about today are relationships. And one of the things that is true, I think, across the Indigenous world, especially when we're talking about sharing Indigenous knowledge, is that we relate to one another through story. And some of these stories may be stories, not the stories that you find in storybooks, but more teachings that we share. So this is who I am. I feel very uncomfortable as a Yupik woman to talk about my accomplishments because, frankly, it is not something that we do. Out of all the things that I do, I serve my tribe in a lot of capacities as the president of our tribal governance, but also being able to write grants and provide development opportunities for my peoples. That includes a lot of relationship building, and that's primarily what I spend a good deal of my time doing. However, with all the committees and councils and positions that I sit on, the most important position that I serve as is the mother of my 3 children. In addition to my children, I serve my partner and his people as well. Where I come from is southwestern Alaska, and my people would call that area the Esagok. Esagok means a beautiful and calm place. However, it being on the shores of the Bering Sea, there might be people that would disagree. However, the area is incredibly rich in biodiversity. We are the habitat, the nesting grounds for over 220 species of migratory birds that come from all over the world. It's really important that you understand just how important this area is to the entire world, okay? We do have a bird that comes from Aotearoa, and is how I met Billy. We worked on a project for a kuaka, a bar-tailed godwit, and that is the bird that has the longest nonstop migration of any bird in the entire world. So that's what brought me here initially. And the Yukon Delta, in that area, there's a refuge that has borders that came in around 35 of our villages. My village is included. My people are displaced, so my people live between 3 villages primarily and other cities and places in the U.S. So one of the things that you may be aware of is that my people, the Yupik people of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, are in one of the most climate vulnerable places in the entire world. And as you can see with this excerpt from our climate vulnerability study, Tora Jorgensen said back in 2019 that we are the most vulnerable region in the Arctic to climate change. This can be found in the climate vulnerability study that was published. You can find it on ResearchGate, or you can ask me later and I can get it too. So what we're seeing here is actually a graphic that shows the vulnerability of our area. And you can't, my village is not highlighted, but you see that little spit of land that juts out? That's where I'm from. And so one of the things that's happening in my region is that we are starting to experience catastrophic weather events. This is an image from NOAA. This is a picture, a satellite picture of Typhoon Merbok that hit our lands in 2022. Now, if you would superimpose the eye of that storm over the state of Alaska, it fills pretty much the entire state. And to give you context for those of you that are not from the US or not familiar with how large Alaska is, it's 1/5 of the entire landmass of the contiguous US. It's huge. During that particular storm, 1,300 miles of coastline were hit, particularly hard, including my village. And just recently, over this past fall, we had Typhoon Halong, another catastrophic storm that actually was so damaging that 2 entire villages were evacuated and are deemed completely uninhabitable, which means that 2,000 of my relatives, and they're actually my relatives, they're people that are related through my father's family, have been removed from their home because of climate events. They were forced to leave their home with 1 bag, with no idea of when they would be able to return. So suffice it to say, we are actively feeling the effects of climate change in my region. And I do want to make one little brief statement. I saw on a bullet point on the opening ceremony that said something about surprises are starting to surpass Indigenous knowledge, and I'd like to correct that. As an Indigenous auntie, it is my responsibility to redirect and correct people when they are ill-informed. For many of us in Western Alaska, in Alaska in general, and all Indigenous people, we've had this long, complicated history with ologists. And what I'm showing on here is a picture of my atara, my mother's uncle. He was somebody that actually was one of the native guides on an expedition by Olaus Murie, who wrote a natural history of the area, along with other people who documented birds and such. One of the things that I want to point out is that Western science and academia has this really bad habit of exceptionalism. And so what I want to mention here is, as a 16 to 20-year-old man, my atara was one of the people within my community that brought these people all over the Waikato Delta. And they're the reason that the compendium of knowledge, not only from Olaus Murie, but from Herman Brandt, had been written. That knowledge that's in there is the knowledge of my people and the knowledge of other people in other communities that they visited. One of the things that's happened throughout Western science academia, our relationships have not been acknowledged. Our contributions to science, to academia, have not been acknowledged. And very soon, we will actually have a piece in Audubon that acknowledges the work that these men like my atara, have contributed to science. So how are we as Indigenous people utilizing our relationships? For us, relationships are everything. It's something that Liza touched on briefly, and Sandy, and we know this. For those of us that are Indigenous and live in very traditional societies, not only do we have to learn the language of English, but we also have to learn the language of science. And one of the things that we do in my region is we have ranger camps. So I made a determination a number of years ago, before 2020, that I wanted to have an ability for us to grow our own citizen scientists, because we as Indigenous people are applied scientists. We always have been, we always will be. So we started pairing our youth with Indigenous traditional knowledge holders, as well as Western scientists. So we bring the scientists to us. We don't bring our kids to the scientists. And the reason that we do that was because we want them on our lands. We want them to get these messages on the lands that their ancestors have walked on. So the key component for us as Yupik people, as people of Paimiut, is to actually have our tribal members that carry that knowledge to share with our youth. And the idea of climate change being a relatively new idea is also incorrect. My elders and ancestors have long talked about these things that were going to come to pass. Unfortunately, Western science and academia didn't believe us. So I've known for my entire lifetime the things that were going to be happening in my lands. I knew that the food that we so relied on and loved was going to be scarce. I knew that the things that I was familiar with, as far as the weather went, would change. I've been told that my whole life, and so has everybody else that lives in my community. We've known this forever. In fact, there are so many things that Western science and academia have long put a blindfold to themselves when it comes to Indigenous peoples. That is kind of laughable when we see all these new discoveries that we've known. Western science is catching up to Indigenous knowledge. It's not the other way around. So, Liza mentioned, and a few of my other esteemed panelists have mentioned, that partnerships are really, really important to the work that we do. And it is really important to develop and cultivate these relationships, not only for us as peoples, as far as governance goes, but also so that we have the best pool of people that we can introduce our youth to, so they can be on the fast track to becoming scientists in their own right. And these are just some of the scientists and organizations that we work with on a regular basis, related just specifically to migratory birds. But then we developed these other relationships. There was a while ago that I decided that I was really tired of waiting for the state of Alaska or for the academic institutions or even the federal government to take us seriously. So we started reaching out on our own. We decided that we're not waiting for anybody to allow us to join them, that we're doing this on our own. So back in 2023, we'll talk about this later, I think. 2023, we began a relationship with the Maori and Whanganui that came to Alaska, looking for people who knew about this kuaka, that bird I mentioned with the longest migration path. And that's when we began talking. And since then, we can't stop talking. We have started conversations around the world with Indigenous peoples in over 20 countries, who we work with regularly, specifically on projects related to migratory birds, ecosystem research, as well as habitat restoration and education. Some of our partnerships include rangers in Australia, Aboriginal or Indigenous rangers in Australia. And it really has been unbelievable how quickly these partnerships have allowed us to traverse the Pacific Ocean and the lands around it. Being able to do this has also allowed us to develop an initiative that has spawned a collective with those people in over 20 countries. We will be hosting a conference later this year for Children of the Sky, which is the child of all these collaborations, connections, and conversations. So I will leave you with this last slide. I want you to take a picture. I want you to not take a picture. Take a look at the picture of my Auntie Selma D. Auntie Selma was probably one of the most joyous people that I had ever known. And this is taken from a report on Indian education that was done, I think, by the BIA back in the 70s or 80s. And my favorite quote on there still holds true these many decades later. That is our conviction that the Yupik way of life can be saved, and only the young can save it. I really hope that the things that we share over the next days, the conversations that we may have, may inspire you to open up your eyes, your hearts, your minds, and also your pocketbooks if you're a funder, to fund Indigenous research, Indigenous projects, and also to really think about how your organization is working with Indigenous peoples. If you're not, this is a really good time to start thinking about doing that. Koiana.
Tēnā koutou, thank you so much for the stimulating narratives from these really diverse parts of the world, really diverse locations or geographical contexts, socio-political contexts, Indigenous communities, and the settler nations that you will work through. We don't have a lot of time, and I can see that people are either shy or don't know how to use the app. There's not a lot of questions in there, but we are quite short of time in any case. So I thought what we might do in that instance, instead of asking for questions from the audience, we've got an Indigenous panel here who all work with scientists in lots of different ways all around the world. And I thought maybe if we could start with questions that you would ask either this forum, scientists in this forum, or scientists that you work with at home. If someone was coming to work with your community, what would be the key questions that you might ask them? I might point to Waya Sandy. Would you like to go first, please?
Yeah, thanks, Billy, and just acknowledging that the time, so I won't say too much. I guess the question I would ask is why, and why us?
Oh, short and sweet. That's very short and sweet. Thank you, Waya. We do have a bit more time than that. Did you want to add too?
No, I don't mind adding to that. I guess the other thing we would ask is, what is it that you know about us, and what would we gain from that relationship as well? And in line with what we've all been talking about. So, yeah, that's just another short addition to that.
Okay, to Waya, thank you. Did anybody else want to have an answer?
Hello? I think that kind of sums it up actually for me too. It also just, what are you doing with this research at the end of it, and how is it being funded? Because really a lot of times, there's grant applications that are due. There's these different policies that are trying to be met. And so what happens when there isn't any funding, or what is your contingency plan to get this done? And who owns this data? What do we have to do with this? And who we want to be able to have ownership and also have a rapport with you. So like I said, we don't want people to be coming in and just taking and not have a plan for how this is going to benefit us in the future as Indigenous people.
Matawa Douglas, did you have any kōrero? Anything to add?
I think what she just said is like the common thing that we all have, being from the Arctic or from the North or anywhere, is that we need to sit down with people and discuss the issues that we're facing, and that's how we're going to have to move forward with defining which research programs that are best going to help us in decision making, as well as education for our groups of people and stuff like that.
Hello. Mine's more directed at action. So getting involved in different forums around the world, the research isn't necessarily tied to policy or action, and I want to know what you're prepared to do, not only in cultivating relationships with Indigenous communities and also other organizations, so that you're not siloing all this data all by yourself. What are you prepared to do in order to actually create positive movement in this climate and ecosystem work? I mean, it's wonderful, I guess, for some people to get a citation for the work that you've published, but really, aside from the research, what are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do about the things that you are actually finding out? Who are you prepared to work with? And why aren't you doing it now? Those are the questions that I have. But really seriously consider, what are you going to do with the things that you're studying?
Can I just also add in, because you've just prompted me as well. I was in on an email, and it was a request for something, and then the response, and it was to a Māori academic, and it was in the spirit of that was, have you done your submission to government on protecting our treaty rights? Have you done your submission to government on Māori health? Because this year we've had a lot, or last year we had to do almost submissions weekly. In fact, it's this Friday that the one on the environment ends, right? And so, in the spirit, so that it's not just us doing all of these submissions, but being good allies in terms of supporting us politically, that in this, and to add to the discussion about reciprocity and obligation, there's certain things that we would want as well, because a research relationship is more than just a research relationship, and the data is a finite point in the research, but it's not a finite point in the relationship. So you have to continue to be allies. You might endear yourself to the community, that they'll come to you for other expertise outside of the research. So it's what then becomes your commitment to that ongoing relationship.
We're incredibly grateful. I kind of want to come back to those metaphors that we often draw on, and to ground the kōrero that you each gave in that. This idea of weaving knowledges together really creates a hopeful sentiment in it. This progressive, maybe a newer model, this idea of the waka taurua, so two canoes lashed together, maintaining their independence, but finding their commonality through this negotiation space between them. Okay, so I think that sentiment comes through really, really nicely. The beauty of starting a conference like this is that there's an opportunity for Indigenous peoples to frame that conversation at the front end, instead of being kind of brought in and then pulled every which way and other, trying to service a real a need. So I'm really grateful. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Thank you for your kōrero. Not only your kōrero, but your āhua. You shared your heart. I'm always really surprised when I watch Indigenous presentations that there's very few graphs in there, but there's always family members represented, and there's always landscape represented. And that integral nature of identity and place and people in your work is incredibly evident, and I hope everybody grapples with that sentiment throughout the conference. So thank you again for your kōrero. Before we eat, we have a karakia as well. Ka pai? Okay. Nau mai ngā hua o te wā o te ngā kino o te waitai o te wai Māori. Nā tāne, nā rongo, nā tangaroa, nā maru. Ko rangi nui e te hunei, ko papatu anduku e takoto aka nei. Turu turu wōwiti waka maua ki a tīna, hui e, tai ki e. You'll get used to the tīna and the tai ki e, okay, by the end of this conference. Ka pai. Oh, I get one.